Ask your own company right now who owns AI governance. Actually think about it for a second. If there was a pause before you got to that name, that pause is basically the whole video. It's not that companies don't care about this, most of them care quite a bit, right? At least on paper. There's usually an acceptable use policy somewhere, maybe a slide from legal, maybe a memo, from IT about which tools are approved. What there almost never is a single person or team who can actually answer, are we allowed to do this? With authority and with speed. I sat in on a vendor risk conversation not too long ago where 3 different people, legal, IT, and a business unit lead, each genuinely believed someone else had already signed off on a new AI tool the team had been using for weeks. Nobody was lying. Nobody was careless, really. They just each assumed the ball was in someone else's court. That's not a security failure, that's an ownership failure. And I see that exact shape of conversation constantly right now. Here's what AI governance actually looks like in most companies today. Legal owns the contract language and vendor risk. IT owns which tools are technically approved. Security owns whether the tool can touch sensitive data. And individual business units are quietly using tools nobody approved at all because the approval process is slow and their deadline isn't. So every one of those groups is doing their actual job. None of them are doing the job of AI governance because in most orgs, that job doesn't exist as a defined role. It exists as a set of adjacent responsibilities, loosely coordinated, usually only after something's already gone wrong. So companies have dealt with ownership gaps before. Data governance took years to mature at a lot of places as well. But this one has a specific problem. The pace of adoption is way outrunning the pace of policy. Employees don't wait for a governance framework before pasting a document into a chatbot to summarize it, right? The convenience is immediate, and the policy usually isn't. That means the gap isn't sitting quietly waiting to be found in an audit. It's actively being used right now by well-meaning employees who have no idea they're doing anything risky. So the shape is almost always the same. Someone pastes a chunk of a contract into a public AI tool to get a faster summary. Nobody told them not to because no clear policy ever actually reached them. Legal finds out 3 months later, not because a control caught it, but because someone mentioned it casually in a meeting, right? Nothing was hacked, but sensitive data left the organization's control anyway, because governance was spread across 4 teams and owned in practice by none of them. Here's what I actually do about it. It's more and simpler than most companies wanted to admit, really. Name an owner, even if it's a committee. Give it a chair, because a committee without a named accountable lead behaves exactly like no committee when a fast decision is needed. Write the policy for the employee who's never going to read a 30-page document. A 1-page decision tree beats a policy nobody opens. And build a fast lane for approvals, because if getting a tool approved takes 6 weeks, people will just use unapproved in 1 week. If I had to guess where the next serious AI-related incident comes from at most companies, it wouldn't, probably be a sophisticated attack. I bet, on an employee who had no idea they were doing, anything wrong using a tool nobody explicitly told them not to use, because no one ever decided clearly in one place whose job it was to make that call. So drop a comment. Tell me, if I asked your company today who owns AI governance, would you actually be able to name that person? Not a department, a person. I want to see how many of you can. So subscribe for more of this every week, and I'll see you in the next one.